Hello, everyone, and welcome to a Climate-Wise Communities webinar. Today, we'll be doing a bushfire simulation of the East Lindfield area. And before I get started, I'd like to do a very quick acknowledgement of country. So on behalf of Council, I recognise the traditional custodians of the land, past, present, and on whose land we stand. Ku-ring-gai Council is proud of its Aboriginal heritage and culture, and we especially recognise this in my welcome to you. And I'd like to introduce the panelists for tonight's webinar. To my right here is Dr. Jenny Scott. She's the Sustainability Project Leader here at Council. And online here is Mark Schuster. He is our Bushfire Technical Officer. Wave hello, Mark. Yep, there you are. And we also have, we should be having, there is Andrew Wilson from the Clara Brigade, RFS. And we have with us from New South Wales Fire and Rescue, Adam Perry and James Manuel. So, and a little bit later on, we should be having, during the Q&A session, we'll be inviting Gary Hansen to join us at that point as well. Okay, so the Climate-Wise Communities program and workshop was developed in the wake of the 2009 Black Saturday fires. And the workshop contents incorporates the findings from the Royal Commission that came out of the Black Saturday fires. One of the key findings was that very few people had bushfire plans, and very few of them actually worked. So the aim of this workshop is to show you the worst case bushfire scenario that could hit the Ku-ring-gai area. And this is the situation we would like you to prepare for. That way you can handle anything less that hits you. So, and as part of the workshop, we like to get people to do a poll, just so we understand where the participants are in terms of their bushfire preparedness. This poll is very short, it's only 10 questions. And if there are some questions that might not necessarily might not be applicable to you, but you still need to answer them. So just click the best answer that relates to you. And some questions relate to questions further on down the line, but it's very straightforward. And I'll just talk you through the poll as well. So everyone should be able to do it fairly easily. So again, it's a 10-question poll and it's pretty straightforward. And please let me know if you can't see the poll. It should be appearing on your screen any moment now. So the first question is fairly straightforward. Do you live in a bushfire prone land or emperor zone? If you're not sure, just click unsure. Question 2, have you experienced a bushfire before? Yes, no, pretty straightforward. Question 3, do you have a bushfire survival plan? Tick what relates to you. And if you don't have one, indicate the reason why you don't have one. If you have a plan, just tick NA and move on to the next question. Similarly, if you have a plan, where do you keep your plan if you have one? And if you answered no in the previous question, just tick NA and move on to question 6. And if you have a plan, just tell us how confident you are in that plan. And then if your plan is to, and also mention in question 7, if your plan is to stay and defend or leave early. Okay, great. We can see people are answering the poll, which is fantastic. Question 7, have you modified your home to make it more resilient to bushfire? Click whatever relates to you. Unfortunately, we can't have open text in these polls, so we can't have every single option there. And question 9 is, how well do you know your neighborhood? Again, fairly straightforward. And then lastly, what prompted you to attend the workshop? In fact, this question needs to be changed. You have only received a letter. There was no flyer. But you might have seen a Facebook post or an e-newsletter. Or maybe you would have heard about the workshop from a neighbor, perhaps. Okay, so we've got a few more people to complete the poll. We might give the poll an extra couple of minutes just to give everyone a chance to answer the poll. So just bear with us. Okay, I think we should be good now. I think everyone who's going to answer the poll would have done the poll by now. So anyway, I'll end the poll now and we'll move on with the rest of the workshop. So thank you very much for everyone who answered those questions. Your feedback is really important to us. It helps us understand how well we're doing in terms of the workshop contents. Okay, so the key part of tonight's workshop is the sim table. Now, in non-COVID times, you would have been in a room and you would have seen this big tray of crushed walnut shell, very finely ground crushed walnut shell. And above that tray, you would have had you would have seen a projector mounted above this crushed walnut shell, projecting the image downwards. And so what we normally do is get people to shape the shell into the terrain, and then we'll overlay an aerial image on top of it, so you get this 3D effect of the local terrain. It's very effective, but unfortunately you can't see that in this workshop because we're doing it by Zoom. But we got this sim table back in 2019 from the States. It's former US military technology that was used by the Army to help plan operations in Iraq and Afghanistan. And luckily for us, they've commercialized it and we're able to purchase one. And without much, and so that's the sim table, and unfortunately you can't see it, but however, you can go on the Clamp-Wise Community's website and see a video that shows you how it works in real life. So the next part of the workshop is that we will show you a reconstruction of a devastating bushfire that hit the town of Paradise in California back in 2018. And to do that, I'll pass you over to Dr. Jenny Scott, who will conduct this portion of the workshop. After that, I will then do a reconstruction of the Gospers Mountain Fire, and then we will launch a simulated bushfire in the East Killara area. And we will get to show you how to use the Clamp-Wise Community's website to help make a bushfire survival plan. And then after that, James will then give you a talk about the CFU and how you can get involved. And then following that, we'll have a Q&A session. So there's a lot to get through. So I'll stop talking and let Dr. Jenny Scott get on with the campfire.
Right. Thanks, everybody, and hello. The reason that we're going to show you this particular fire is because it was and still is the most costly fire in American history, both in terms of lives lost and financial losses. So it was located in an area of Butte County, just outside the township of Pulga was where it started, in Butte County in Northern California. The conditions immediately leading up to the ignition of this fire, there was highly combustible fuel loads in this steeply forested terrain. There was heavy grass cover due to a wet spring, an unusually dry autumn that followed that spring, decreased humidity levels, and that was due to several recent wind events where the wind was coming off the desert, unusually dry fuels, and hot, dry, gusty winds. And on the day that the ignition occurred, it was a red flag warning day, a bit like our catastrophic fire days. So people were on high alert. They were prepared for this kind of a fire. But as you can see, as this fire unfolded, there wasn't a lot people could do to really reduce the risk. So on Thursday, the 8th of November, at around 6:15 a.m. in the morning, a problem was detected with power lines around Poe Dam on Camp Creek Road, not far from Pulga. So James is just showing you that on the map. And within a few minutes, calls started coming in to the Emergency Management Centre reporting the fire. So you can see up there the fire has ignited, and it was due to these power lines that came down in the winds. And James will tell you that the reason those power lines came down was because of some clips that were way past their use-by date that were holding the power lines on the poles. So fire tankers were dispatched, but they were unable to gain access to the fire itself because of the winding mountain roads, which were too steep for the fire trucks to be able to navigate. Aircraft were grounded because the winds were gusting over 80 kilometres an hour, which was above the acceptable limit for waterbombing aircraft to fly. In fact, the aircraft were unable to fly until later that afternoon. So you can see what's happened here. Down the bottom is an actual timeline that will tell you the time since ignition of this fire. So we're only an hour into the fire and already it has spotted ahead about roughly 10 kilometres. So you can see that those yellow dots that are coming up around the dam there, that are new fires ignited by embers blown ahead of the fire front. So the community in the townships of Ku-ring-gai received no warning before the fire hit about 7 a.m. A caller at 7:07 to the local radio station reported the fire was in Ku-ring-gai, and with the high winds, they described the fire as ripping. At 7:23 a.m, the Sheriff's Office in Pulga began evacuations. Calls from residents in Ku-ring-gai and Paradise continued to come over the next hour at the rate of 1 a minute. They were told there was no danger, that the fire was to the north of Ku-ring-gai and no evacuations were necessary, and they would be contacted if there was any threat. At this point, the fire was actually establishing itself on the fringes of Ku-ring-gai. At 8 a.m, the fire entered the eastern areas of the township of Paradise. Now you can see again the fire has spotted another 10 kilometres ahead and has ignited these fires just to the east of Paradise. The first few hours saw a cascade of failures in the emergency alert system, rooted as it was in a patchwork of opt-in emergency signals. And this was compounded by the loss of 17 phone towers in the high winds. These points of failure in a fast-moving fire allowed no room for anyone on the ground. Several minutes into the Paradise fire, the wind speeds were now exceeding 80 kilometres an hour in Paradise, and most of the residents were unable to evacuate before the fire arrived. Due to the speed of the fire, the firefighters, for the most part, never attempted to control the fire, but rather just concentrated on saving lives. The California fire chief on duty said pretty much the community of Paradise is being destroyed. It's that kind of devastation. The wind that was predicted came and it's just wiping us out. Now you can see how on the side, the eastern side of Paradise, that is quite a considerable fire front building there. And at any moment now, you'll see more spot fires starting on the western side of Paradise. Now this rapidly builds over the next hour into another fire front. And this town is now being caught between the two separate fire fronts, one burning toward the east, the other burning towards the west. And gradually you'll see all the exit routes out of the township of Paradise are being cut off. And as they're being cut off, people were told to stay and shelter in place. There were thousands of 911 calls to the two emergency dispatchers on duty that day. Emergency alerts suffered from human error as city officials failed to include 4 at-risk areas in the city's evacuation orders. Technical errors on the day meant that emergency alerts failed to reach 94% of people. In the first 4 hours of the campfire, it caused 86 civilian fatalities, with 12 civilian and 5 firefighters injured. There were 18,804 structures destroyed, 62,000 hectares of land burnt, with a total damage bill of $16.5 billion, $4 billion of which were uninsured losses. The Camp Fire would be recorded as the deadliest and most destructive fire in human history. And if you're interested and you want to have a look, you can see the satellite images of the township of Paradise before and after that fire went through. And it spared very few buildings. The only thing that's surprising about it is that there weren't more people killed. So this kind of fire is the kind of fire that we want people to think about when they're doing their bushfire survival plan. And these fires can and have and will happen in Australia. Fortunately for us, they haven't happened in such a heavily populated area. But as James will show you, the Gosper Mountain fire was a fire of greater magnitude than this, but it just happened to be in an area where there weren't a lot of people. So I'll hand it back to James to show you the Gosper Mountain fire.
Thank you very much, Jenny. And okay, so let me just get this Gosper Mountain fire up and see how we go. So this fire is very different to the campfire in that the period this fire went for was quite significant. It was around about I think 3 months or so. It started on the 26th of October and ran all the way through to the 8th of February. So this fire itself burned around about, say, 512,000 hectares. 90 homes were lost and countless animals and insects were killed in that fire. Now, the conditions leading up to the fire were quite extraordinary. And it was the year that 2019 was the hottest and driest year on record, or one of the hottest and driest years on record. The 3 years leading up to the fire, from January 2017 to December 2019, areas of New South Wales had the lowest rainfall on record. All of New South Wales was declared in drought. And areas of New South Wales also experienced the lowest fuel moisture levels and the highest forest fire danger index of all previous fire seasons. Also, records were being set for the number of days with very high or higher danger days. So there was also no evidence at all that the fire was driven by high fuel loads. Research by bushfire researchers have found that it was most likely that average fuel loads and record-breaking fuel dryness led to the intensity of the fires. There are even reports of crown fires in the Blue Mountains area, in areas that had been recently burned. So it's really the key point to mention there is the fact that we're talking record-breaking dryness, which made a lot more fuel available to the fire and helped the fire burn with much higher intensity. So, as I mentioned, the fire started on the 26th of October. And the day that the fire broke out, there was quite a significant amount of storm activity in the area. And about 19,000 lightning strikes struck areas to the west of the Gospers Mountain or Wollomai National Park area. However, one lightning bolt, a bit of an outlier, actually struck the area of the Gospers Mountain. So I'll zoom into exactly where that happened. Right there, just as you can see, that's Gospers Mountain, and shortly you'll see the fire start in that area there. So on that day, it was a very fast moving fire. So 2.5 hours after the fire started, we had 65 hectares were burnt, and the following day, 520 hectares were burnt. So, as Jenny mentioned, this was a very big fire, and so for the purpose of demonstration, what I'll do is I'll speed the replay of this fire up, and at various points I'll pause and we'll discuss what happens there. Otherwise, we'll be here all night watching the fire progress throughout the Wollomai National Park. And there'll be periods where I won't necessarily be talking that much either. So, don't worry, your connection's still working if I'm not talking. So as the fire progresses towards the south and southeast, there was a period of rain that actually calmed the fire down quite significantly, and it almost put the fire out. However, on 13 days after the ignition of the fire, on the 7th of November, there was a weather change where conditions dried and became a lot hotter, and all the fuel dried out again. And that led to a really big fire run, about 12 kilometers in one day. And at that point, people found that there wasn't much that could be done to stop the fire stage once it got to the sides. So, and I'll have to zoom out quite frequently as well, because the size of the fire is really quite astounding. So in the next couple of moments, you'll notice that in the southeast of the fire, there'll be a really big fire run. And that's the one I just mentioned, the 12 kilometers in just one day. I'll speed it up so it can happen a bit quicker. I will call that when it happens, but I'm sure you'll see it yourself. Here it is, it's about to start. There it is. That's the 12-kilometer run in just one day. Just pause it there. Okay, so anyway, I'll continue actually. So that's the first major event there of fire. But then around about the 12th of November, or 18 days after the fire, we get the declaration of the first catastrophic bushfire danger day in New South Wales. I'll just pause it there. So now this day saw another really big fire run where the fire traveled incredibly fast. In fact, it was such a fast run that it covered 12 kilometers in just 2.5 hours. And by the end of the day, we had 65,000 hectares were burnt, and the fire had a perimeter of approximately 170 kilometers. Now, I'd like everyone just to cast their mind back to the 12th of November 2019, because that's the day the Ku-ring-gai road fire also broke out. So those are the kind of conditions that this massive fire run happened. And so I'll start that, I'll play now so you can see what that looked like. Well, there it is. That's that really fast fire run just there. So we'll just play the fire a little bit fast now to get to the next key point. And one thing I'll mention now is that these high winds that involved in the fire cause a lot of embers to travel ahead of the fire front, starting fires outside the main body of the fire. And you'll get spot fires dropping out all over the place. And that can make dealing with this fire quite tricky, I would imagine. So the next key part here, I like to mention, I'll pause it now, is that on the 33 days after ignition, on the 27th of November, there was again a period of very intense storm activity. There was lightning and lightning strikes around the fire. And that led to the start of the Little L complex, the Thompson Creek fire, and the 3 Mile Creek fire. So just keep an eye out to the north east there, as well as to other areas around the south and just around to the southeast as well, and the north. So there's a lot of fire activity in the area. And so when these fires all join together, you'll get the what's called the Goss's Manor fire, would then be known as the mega fire, because it's just that big. Okay, so now we're getting towards the 14th of December, and this was a day. The 14th of December was when a backburn was planned by the RFS. Now, the backburn was planned for a day where the weather conditions were supposed to be calm, where there was going to be little or no wind. However, after the backburn was started, by 2 p.m., the weather conditions changed unexpectedly, and the wind picked up from the southwesterly direction. And then by 2:55, by 2:54, there were spotovers. And then within 30 minutes, the crews had to do property protection. So where the Mount Wilson area is just at the bottom of your screen along Bell's Line of Road. It happens very quickly, so you have to keep an eye on that area there. So there you go. That's the Mount Wilson backburn. That got out of control due to the weather conditions, unexpected weather conditions. And then at this point, the fire is now Australia's biggest fire on the record, and it's 5 times the size of Singapore. Back out so you can see exactly how big the fire is now. So as you can see, it really is quite a massive fire. But luckily, the vast majority of the area that was burnt was uninhabited in the wilderness area, with the exception of the Bell's Line of Road area. However, as you'll note, the fire did make its way down to the Hawkesbury River area. So we'll just pause it there. I think this is pretty much all that really happens and all that really concerns us here. So the last thing I'd like to mention is that at this time, I think around about this time, 57 days or after the ignition of the fire, fire crews were working really hard to contain the fire around the Hawkesbury River, because had it jumped the Hawkesbury River, it would have only been about 1 day away from reaching the urban fringes of Hornsby, the Hills, and Ku-ring-gai. And as we saw in the previous fire runs, 12 kilometers in just 2.5 hours, at that rate, you'd be expecting the fire to reach Ku-ring-gai or Hornsby area in around about 8 hours or so. So the estimated time to arrival for a fire of 1 day is highly plausible. But luckily, the southerly winds blew the fire back on itself, and that helped the fire crews to contain the fire at Wiseman's Ferry. So that really highlights exactly how fast fires can move, and even though a fire starts in the wilderness area, it can very quickly become a major problem for people in the North Shore. And the bushfire plan should always take into consideration fires far away, and also take into consideration that while fires being fought far away, you could have a pretty significant fire happen on your doorstep. Say, for example, the Canoe Road fire that broke out while the Gospels Mountain fire was raging. So yeah, I think that's it for that fire. It does burn for another month or so, but the southerly area is pretty much as far as it goes there for us. So I think we'll just pass over to Dr. Jenny Scott now.
Okay, thanks, James. So they're the 2 fires that we wanted to show you, and the messages that are coming out were both with the Paradise Fire and the Gospel Mountain Fire, is how quickly these blazes can travel. Those spot fires make the prediction of where they're actually going to be at any point in time quite challenging for the fire mapping people. So it's always wise to err on the side of caution when you are doing your bushfire planning. And the best option always is to be not there when the fire gets close. So as we advised people back in 2019-20 to leave if there's a severe fire warning day forecast for the next day, or catastrophic fire warning day, and you live on the bushland interface, just go out for the day. Just leave your property. There is quite a body of evidence to show from the work that was done around Black Saturday that the main reason people's bushfire plans failed was because the fires didn't happen the way they thought they would. So we're going to change over now to have a look at Ku-ring-gai, and we're specifically going to look at that East Lindfield area. Now, whilst we're doing that, I might just ask if Andrew or perhaps Mark could give us a little bit of information about the fire history in the area around East Lindfield.
Actually, I'd like to pause here. Sorry, Jenny. Just to mention to the audience that if you need to ask a question, please pop the question into the Q&A box. That should be at the bottom of the screen. If you have any technical issues, please put them in the chat. I'll get to them. And if you want to ask a question, I know some put their hands up, but in order to get through the workshop, we'll just leave all questions to the end of the section. Yeah. Sorry about that, Jen.
Okay, so a little bit about the history of the fire in the area.
Yeah, it's rather interesting, actually. I'll get Andrew after me to give the devil in the detail. But in 1945, when a lot of soldiers came back to Sydney, they were straight off the troop ships and had to fight a fire in East Lindfield. And that was the end of 1945, and that affected the Wellington Road and Melbourne streets. And I think 7 to 8 houses were lost back then. It was a bit hard to contain, required the military presence, and also all the firefighters, whether it be fire and rescue back then or RFS. So that was 45, and 94 there were impacts also in that East Lindfield area. I was down the bottom, as I call it, last week on the northern side, down in the gullies, doing some fuel sampling, and there's fairly high, very high to extreme fuel loads down there. Wouldn't take much to get a fire going, and there's plenty of evidence of past wildfires due to the growth in the vegetation. There's certain classes of vegetation that follow a fire, and also there has been a hazard reduction burning in there, the last being in 2014. Andrew could correct me if that's wrong, but that's a bit of a, just to say that yes, fires do happen down in Middle Harbour. A lot of people say to me, no, Mark, there'll be no fires, but yeah, it's got enough potential there. So I'll hand over to Andrew now for the detail. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. I remember one fire just at the edge of East Killara there about 2009, 2010, started down by the water and tore up the hillside there pretty quickly. That's the last actual bushfire I remember in that particular area there, but there has been quite a bit of hazard reduction burning undertaken down that whole strip, East Killara, East Lindfield, over the last 2 or 3 years, around the Lord's Retirement Village, the Lindfield Gardens, and several other patches along that whole area. So that's one thing we do try and do. Obviously, last few months haven't been conducive to that with a bit too much rain, but look, it's certainly a very important bit of bushland there that we're always looking at and always trying to reduce the hazards through controlled burning.
Great, thank you both for that. So this is an area that has a history of fire, and we'll look at what would be not necessarily the worst case scenario. The simulation that we're going to show you could be one of 1,000 different ways a fire unfolds in this area. We've just created one that shows you what a really destructive fire might look like, and what sort of things you might have to plan for as part of that fire. But before we ignite the fire, we're just going to go over to the Climate Wise Communities website and have a look at the very first step, because this helps people determine the risks of where they live, what risks are posed to them. So we'll just open it up. It's moving fast tonight, that's good. And we start our ready check, and we agree that we won't sue anybody. And
we'd like to get your help on any improvements we could do to the website. So this message is just about to provide some feedback. So if you want to provide feedback on how this website could be improved, just click on the sidebar there, that green tab there, and you can give us some feedback on ways to improve the site. So that's why that's there.
okay, so the very first step is about mapping your location. So if you live in the Ku-ring-gai area and you put in your address, this tool will find exactly where you live and show you an outline of your property. So we'll put in a random address. It won't be in East Lindfield, but it shows you, it makes the point. So this particular property, you can see, has got some different risks, and we'll look at the key in a minute and find out what they are. But it is in the bushfire prone lands area. It's also subject to ember attack, and it's also got flood issues. So if we scroll down to the bottom of the page, there's a little summary there, a tick the box, and it tells you what the mapping tool has found that are risks to this particular location. So like I said, it has bushfire risk, it has ember attack risk. It doesn't have exit issues. Exit issues means usually there's only one road in and one road out. And so those people really have to plan ahead in order to not be there when the fire threatens. The flood, the storm and the heat wave, every property in Ku-ring-gai will get that box ticked because every property is vulnerable to both storm and heat wave. So that's the very first step of the climate-wise community. So we'll go back to our fire. And we haven't lit it yet, but we're going to say the fire ignites somewhere close by a population, because in this instance, this is like an American red flag warning day. It's a severe fire weather day. It's very, very hot. It's windy, and it's on at the end of a long dry spell. So the fuels in the bushland tend to dry, and so any little spark is going to ignite the fire. Now, in this particular instance, we're going to pretend that the fire has ignited by someone using an angle grinder at the back of their property, and a spark flies off that angle grinder and ignites the bushland. So there's the fire igniting. I think it's moving a little bit quicker than we want it to. That's better.
Well, now might be a good point to describe the features of the sim table that people can see.
Yep.
Up in the top left of your screen, you'll have a wind speed and direction dial. This allows us to control the direction of wind and the speed at which it's moving at. So maximum is 96 kilometers an hour, and we can change the wind direction to any which way we like. So in this scenario, we'll be maybe having it coming from the predominant wind direction speed, or direction anyway, is the northwest. It's coming from the northwesterlies, and we'll have it at 47 kilometers per hour. Okay.
Also built into the model that sits behind the sim table is the fuel loads in the bushland. It also has an algorithm that's set for the weather. So the temperature is set at 35 degrees Celsius, and it is low humidity, a humidity of around 10%. So the fuel loads are built in, the weather's built in. The only variables that we put in will be the wind speed and direction at this point. So you can see the fire is establishing itself quite quickly. And at this point, Andrew, what would RFS be doing?
Right. Well, knowing that the bush is quite dry and has obviously got high risk of sustaining fire, and on the sort of day that you described in terms of weather conditions and the overall forest fire danger index, we'd be responding a number of trucks there. There's 2 RFS brigades in the Ku-ring-gai area, but there's a lot of brigades in adjoining districts in Hornsby, the Northern Beaches and whatnot. So there'd be quite a number of trucks responded to a fire that did break out on that sort of day. Our main priority when we arrive at that scene or nearby is going to be safety of members of the public, to make sure they're aware that there's a fire in the immediate vicinity and that they need to start looking after themselves, or we'll be assisting along those lines if we can. So that's the number one priority. The second priority then is property protection. But there's two, it's worth pointing out, there's a couple of things we won't be doing. One is we won't be charging off into the bush to actually tackle the fire. And in terms of evacuations and things like that, that's not something that everyone can expect or rely on. It is very much a case for us of public safety, warning and trying to protect people, and then property protection as our two major objectives.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. Mark, would council be doing anything at this point?
Yes, very much so, Jenny. We have a emergency management team who liaises particularly with the police, ambulance, and of course the fire agencies. And they'd form a small committee, and evacuation would be a prime target, particularly along Hunter Avenue, and also for those northern boundaries of Eastern Killara, and also East Lindfield further south. So yes, the police will be working out where are the evacuation points, where are the weak points, the pinch points where things clog up, and evacuation procedures would be worked out. Virtually what happens, the police are in charge of evacuation when the event happens, so with liaison from all other agencies. So it's really critical because some of these areas, they're sort of almost one way in, one way out. So pretty important. Thanks, Jenny.
Thanks, Mark. So what we'll do now, we'll just pause our fire and we'll go back to climate-wise communities, and we'll have a look at the second step in the process. Now, the second step is all about your personal situation. So we flick over to it and we scroll down, and it asks you a series of questions, and the answers will be very relevant to your bushfire survival plan. So it asks you questions like, are you living alone or do you live with others? And it also, because that can make a difference to how easy it is for you to evacuate. And if we keep scrolling down, so the number of people in your household. And then as you tick the box, you'll see some red writing comes up, and that red writing gives you ideas about why you need to consider this issue for your bushfire survival plan. So it will also might give you a few hints in what you might do as a response to that issue. So if you're a carer for somebody else, then there's a whole lot of issues around that you would need to consider. Whether there are health or medical conditions in the household, and often there are, particularly if there's a person with a disability or elderly people living in the household. And pets in the household are another major consideration, because if you're away at work, for example, during the day, and the fire breaks out, and your pets are at home, then a lot of people have got themselves into trouble trying to go back and rescue those pets. So having a plan A and a plan B, and sometimes a plan C for who can go and get those pets and rescue them if you're not there, is one that's really worth considering. Whether or not you have your own transport or whether or not you'll be relying on somebody else. We had a couple of people at a workshop last year who said they were in their 80s and they were going to depend on their 90-year-old neighbour, for she had a car and still had her license, so she'd be their what source of evacuation. So that was their plan, and I don't know how long it'll last for, but hopefully a long time. So if English is the first language in the household or not, so there may be people who don't know what's happening. So there is that consideration, or perhaps your neighbours of people for whom English isn't the first language, you might be able to help them with their bushfire planning. Home ownership, if you don't own your own home, then it's a matter of negotiation with the person who does own the home about what can be done to improve the resilience of that home to bushfire. The phone connection that you have, of course, when the power goes down, as is often the case both in bushfires and storms, all of a sudden you don't have internet connection, you don't have phone connection, and if you don't have a radio with batteries or your car radio, you might not know what's going on. So we always recommend that people do have access to battery-powered radio, and 702 ABC in Sydney is the emergency broadcaster. So staying tuned to the ABC for the latest updates on what's happening with the emergency. So that's your personal situation. So this is all about developing information that you then can use when you do your bushfire plan. So we'll go back to the fire now and see how it progresses now. So we can see already that it's spotted well ahead and is now threatening a whole different area to where it started. And so as the day advances, the temperature rises and the wind speeds start to pick up. And as the wind speeds pick up, whenever the fire crests a ridge or a hill, that's when the embers take off. And the embers will land sometimes up to 20 kilometres ahead of the fire front and ignite brand new fires. So you can see how difficult it is for the RFS to predict where that might happen. So there is eyes in the sky and on the ground all the time looking for where these spot fires might break out. Now we can see in this particular case, the way the ridgetop development has occurred over the years in Ku-ring-gai, it means that a lot of houses are exposed to bushfire risk. So at the moment, we've got probably several thousand houses immediately exposed to bushfire risk, just the way this fire is shaping up now. So Andrew, what would be happening with RFS?
Well, as you say, one of the key things we do try and do as early as we can is to try and predict what the fire behaviour might be, which way it's travelling, what are the next streets, structures, whatever that are likely to come under impact. And for us, it's important to get notification out as early as we can. So either through the Fires and ME app or in the more of a last resort through the text messaging facilities to warn that there's a fire in your area and that urgent action should be taken. But our priority, very much on the back of that, obviously, is still protecting the public. First and foremost, we may have an opportunity to send trucks to those other areas where you can see the fire is now impacting on various streets. But that's the overriding concern, public safety, and where conditions and resources permit, starting to protect properties. But the key thing to note there is it's not possible when you get a fire of this sort of scale to have one fire truck at every single house. So it is important that people have their own sort of plan as to what they're going to do. And our job really, as I say, really is focused on public safety, keeping people out of the way as best we can, and looking after those who are sheltering if they're caught in these particular areas.
Great. Thank you, Andrew. We've also got with us Adam from Fire and Rescue. Adam, what would Fire and Rescue be doing at this point?
As Andrew said, we would be sending as many resources as possible to combat the fire where it is. We would have staff within the local fire control centre with the RFS looking at where the fire is developing, where it's moving to, and we'd be doing our best to assist with any community acknowledgement or information to protect the community. The biggest thing with these fires on these relevant conditions is they move extremely fast, and sometimes the messaging will be to stay in place, but it's too late to leave. because as you can see by the computer simulation, these fires are moving substantially quick in certain areas, and it is too late to leave in those areas, especially with a lot of our ridge tops with one road in and one road out.
Right, thank you very much, Adam. So looking at the fire now, you can see the fire front is impacting quite a number of properties and moving into an area to affect even more properties. So James, what's the wind speed now?
Oh, the wind speed is quite high. It's up at 93 kilometers an hour. So in this scenario, you could expect embers to be traveling quite a long distance. But in this scenario, I've kept it to be fairly modest.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so what we'll do now, we'll look at step 3 of our Climate Wise Communities website, because this is one that a lot of people find really interesting, and it's about how do you assess the resilience of your property in terms of radiant heat and ember attack. So if you are, worst case scenario, trapped in your house, what chance does that house have of resisting ember attack and radiant heat and staying intact? So we'll just scroll down a little. So what a lot of people like to do is draw a mud map of their property with the most important features about bushfire. So in this particular case, these people had a timber deck. They had vegetation right up beside the house, and they had a swimming pool, and so there was a source of water. Now you see sometimes outside properties the SWS sign, and that tells the RFS and fire and rescue that there's water available on that property to use for bushfire fighting. So if you do have a pool, or you have a tank dedicated to water for firefighting, then getting one of those SWS signs, either from council or fire and rescue, and putting it on your gate out the front is a very good idea. So looking at the property, we do 4 different hazards: bushfire, flood, heat wave and storm, looking at your property resilience for each one. In this case, we're interested in bushfire. So we flick over to it, and you'll see there is a color coding. Red means it's highly vulnerable, and green means it's resilient. So even when you've got a resilient property, it doesn't necessarily mean it won't burn down. It's just less likely to burn down. If it's got a lot of red boxes, then the chances are some retrofitting, some work might be needed to try and improve its resilience. So we look at all the different features of the house, and we start with the roof. And the roof design and the materials used in the roof are quite important in terms of resisting ember attack, a little bit less so radiant heat, but they're very definitely ember attack. And you can see that older materials that aren't well maintained, particularly if it's a tile roof, and the mortar in between the ridge capping and the tiles, they're places where the embers can find entry into the roof space. And that's how a lot of houses burn down. Some houses survive the fire front, only to burn down later because of smouldering embers in the roof. So if we scroll down further, you'll see other features of the house that are pertinent: roof sprinklers, skylights, vents and vent holes, and ventilators can also be points of entry for embers. Eaves and fascias, whether or not they're in good condition, are they made out of timber, etc. And every time you tick a box, that's something that you can use as information for how you might plan to improve the resilience of your property. So we look at gutters and downpipes and walls, and the external material. Is it timber? Is it in good? We keep on moving down. Windows and frames, external doors. All these have relevant features about them that can make them either a resilience feature or a vulnerability feature. Garage doors are one place where embers often very readily get in. Floor spaces and subfloor spaces. So looking at whether or not there is any material stored in that subfloor space, the type of material that the floor is constructed from, etc. And then we're looking at verandas and decking. Again, you can get decking these days that looks like wood and it's very highly rated in terms of bushfire. And then we look at outdoor areas as well. The kind of landscaping that you might have, whether on the type of vegetation, the water supply, again, whether or not you have a pool, useful feature there. Fences and gates, right down to gas bottles on your barbecue. Or if you have gas for the house, where that gas pipe, that gas tank has its vent facing. So it should face away from the house because the gas tanks are designed to vent when they get overheated and expel the gas rather than blow up. And so you'll get a long jet flame coming out of the gas cylinder. So you don't want that pointing at your house. You want it pointing away from anything that might catch fire. So there are a whole range of things in this section for you to look at. And at the very end, if you know your Bowel rating, that can be very useful in planning resilience. So Mark, would you like to just give us a quick summary of what the Bowel rating is?
Yeah, sure. It's based on what they call fire line intensity. It's a fire formula, which is kilowatts per square metre when a fire meets, say, the wall of a house. And you can range from Bowel low, which is a fairly low intensity fire, right through to flame zone, which is over 40 kilowatts per square metre, which is very, very intense. You don't want to be there. The human body itself, 2 to 3 is enough for a minute or two. So it shows you the sort of intensity flames have. But you can upgrade a house from, say, a Bowel 19 or a Bowel 12.5, go upwards. You can take a Bowel 19 to a Bowel 29, and that's starting to make it fairly resilient. To upgrade from a Bowel 29 to a Bowel 40, making a house very, very resilient to radiant heat impacts. That's where heat strikes the actual wall of the house from a flame. So yeah, and Bowel is used right around Australia. Actually, it's Australian standards for when they develop houses or upgrade a house. You have to go through council and get a consultant to look at your Bowel rating particularly along our huge interface where 38% of all our houses are. So yeah, Bowel's most important. I can explain more at any other stage. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. And it's also worth remembering that if you are looking at how much you have your property insured for, understanding how much you might have to increase the value of your property in order to build back to a higher Bowel rating, you want to insure for that higher value. Because if you build back on the same site, you will be required to build back to that higher bushfire attack level. And in some cases, that can add $100,000 to a new build if it's a flame zone. So it's worth knowing that and including that extra value into your insurance policy. Okay, so we'll flick back now to our bushfire, and you can see it's gathered some momentum. It's now increased all over Ku-ring-gai, lots of properties exposed. So at this level, what would be the RFS's advice? Andrew?
The advice that a lot of people would be getting if they're following the fires near me or getting the text message that is circulated around is to shelter in place. Generally here, if there's a lot of people who have already tried to leave, roads could be blocked. It looks like there's a significant impact to quite a number of streets and structures. The advice would be to shelter in place. It's very important to stay out of the radiant heat of the flames, and by far the best place to do that is in a structure, and that's quite preferable to making a last-minute dash for it in a car and being caught out on a road when you've got those sort of flames coming up and about to overrun you.
Yes, indeed. There's many people have died running away from fires, and their houses have survived. So that's very good advice. If people are sheltering in place, where in the house should they shelter in place?
Well, the obvious answer there is at the end away from the fire. So certainly if you're looking at, say, the middle of that map, that fire's coming largely from the north, you'd want to be at the southern end of your house. So if the fire does impact the northern end of your house, at least you've got a much better chance being down the opposite end. It's about keeping out of the radiant heat, so definitely inside, but at the end away from the impact of the fire.
Okay, so on the side of the house that isn't where the fire front is.
Correct.
So you go on the opposite side. And in terms of the best sort of room to shelter in, some people have heard that the bathroom's the best room to shelter in. What would you say to that?
Oh, look, I'm not sure it matters too much. The key thing is away from the radiant heat. So whatever rooms are at the opposite end of the structure from where the fire might impact. The fire front's not going to take too long to pass over. It may be 20, 30 minutes, at which point it may be possible to go outside, but falling embers become a risk at that point. But certainly to me, it's around being at the right end of the house. Hopefully you've been able to prepare the house well. This is what the guidance on the website is aimed at helping people do, by keeping the property clear of rubbish and cleaning out gutters of the fine fuel that's likely to catch fire. But look, all I can say again is if you're stuck, too late to leave, shelter inside a structure, and keep at the end that's away from the likely impact of the fire.
And speaking of structures and sheltering in place, Adam, do you have anything to add to what happens if to a building that is maybe has caught on fire and there are occupants in it, during a bushfire, like that people might not necessarily be aware of? Like, for example, the speed at which, or for example, the roof might be on fire, they might not know about it, and then can collapse.
Yeah.
Those kinds of insights.
Thanks, James. Yeah, look, when you are sheltering in place in the structure, you also should have wet towels covering all the edges around the doors or any gaps around windows, etc., that you can, to stop smoke coming into the property. As Andrew said, to shelter in a room furthest away from the fire impact, but also in a room that has an exit. So if it happens to be a room at the other end of the house that's near the front door, the front door could be your exit. So, and to shelter as close as you can to the ground with a wet cotton towel or something like that to breathe through, because the smoke could get quite thick. If your structure does catch fire and you can physically see that, then you need to evacuate that structure and get to the outside. During the 1920 season, there were significant fires everywhere and as Andrew said, in a fire that develops like this, you're very unlikely to have a fire truck at your front door. There are so many other people within and premises within the community that you live in, and we only have a limited number of resources. So you might get a fire truck within the street. James will mention later on in regard to community fire units and how the way they can assist in prepping and then after the fire front has passed. But the biggest thing is for you to prepare your home, and on those severe days, which this probably would be, or catastrophic days, heed the advice. And if you choose that your plan is to evacuate early and go somewhere for the day that's not that far away, Chatswood Shopping Centre, etc. But make sure that you have the many plans, because as was mentioned earlier, this fire started by a spark on the ground from a grinder. You may not know anything until you've got a whole lot of smoke blowing straight at you. So you have to have a number of plans. Previously, when we were up at East Killara, they made comment to go to the school. The advice would be not to go to schools, but schools have their own evacuation plans and how they manage their own students on site. The emergency services, if feasible, will send buses in to evacuate students. So you've got to go to somewhere that's safe for yourself. There are a couple of neighbourhood safer places, but to my recollection, there isn't any up here, is there, Mark? At this end of East
No,
Lindfield?
actually not around that area, as far as I know.
Yeah, I didn't think so. I thought they were mostly a little bit further south.
Yeah.
And a place, neighbourhood safer place is a place of last resort. So it is a area that doesn't have toilet facilities. It is only for people, not for pets or any other animals. And it's somewhere that you can shelter in an open space. And it is typically the place of last resort if you haven't evacuated early.
The trouble on these ridge lines is that a neighbourhood safer place can't be within 200 metres of bushland. So it's pretty obvious these areas are surrounded by bushland. So it's very hard to actually cite a neighbourhood safer place. That's the issue.
And if we'd like to cast our minds back to both the campfire progression and the Gosford's Mountain, we had fire runs of 12 kilometres in 2.5 hours. So that's equivalent to going from Wahroonga all the way through to the Gore Hill Freeway down near Artarmon. So that's the kind of speed that fires can run. So it's when you make your bushfire survival plan, you have to sort of, we always advise to make sure it's a get out early plan, because imagine everyone in East Lindfield and East Killara or elsewhere trying to evacuate out of the area along the Pacific Highway and local roads. It would just be a log jam. So the advice would always be to not rely on this not to rely on the place of last resort or the safer places, and just be out of the area completely and play it safe.
Okay, thanks everyone for that. So we'll flick back now to climate-wise communities. The step 4 in climate-wise communities is about talking to your neighbours how your neighbourhood might perform when it was under pressure from an extreme weather event, how people might work together to help each other, and also move into the recovery phase where you could assist each other. So again, we get people to draw a bit of a mud map. They mark where their home is, and then they identify properties where they know people quite well, particularly people who might have equipment or facilities and who are very capable, who could help if help was required. Also, people out of the area, the people you might tell if you decide to evacuate where you're going to go. Always tell someone outside the area where you're going to go. So these questions just give you a basis on which to talk to your neighbours about how you might get together should an event like this happen. So how you might become resilient together. And often that's about knowing what resources are available in amongst your neighbours. It's also about knowing who might need help on the day to evacuate, and who might be the sort of people that don't ask for help normally, but you know they don't have any relatives nearby, they don't have a car perhaps, they're going to need help, and include those people in the community planning. So it looks at all different things from different routes in and out of the area. So if you decide you're going to evacuate one way, do you have an alternative, at least one alternative exit route? It talks about, again, the pets and where are you going to take them, who might be able to look after them for you. If you decide to leave early, take them with you. So there's all these questions to move through, and it's a good way to talk to your neighbours about how you can work together. So that's step 4. And in step 5, it also gives you the different plans that different agencies have for emergency management. So there's the RFS plan, have one there for bushfires. The SES has one for floods. The Red Cross has one for heat waves, but the Red Cross one is multi-hazard. So it also covers bushfires and storms and floods. So it's quite a good one if you want to look at everything. And it's actually not a bad idea looking at everything at once, because often what you do to make yourselves more resilient to one emergency weather type, you can also get benefits from a different emergency weather type. So you might look at communication and who you're going to speak to. So whether it's a storm, a flood, or a fire, that's still relevant. And there's also one specifically designed for carers, done by Carers Australia. So all good templates, and we recommend all of them. It's just a matter of choice as to which one you select. So that brings us back to the fire. Now, something that often happens on a hot summer's day in Sydney, when the wind's been blowing from the northwest, we get a southerly change. And we're just going to show you what happens with the fire when we shift the wind around from northwest to south, and how the fire will react to that kind of a southerly buster. So you can see here the orange, and I should have told you this earlier, the orange is or the yellow is the fire front. The orange and red are fully involved active fire, and the black is where the fire has burnt areas out. Now, this happened in the 1920 summer fire. Areas that had previously burned a second time when the fire came back through. So don't think because a fire front has passed, particularly one that goes past very quickly, there still might be enough fuel left for the fire to reignite. And in this case, you can see the fire front has now shifted and changed direction and is exposing a whole new group of houses to bushfire, people who probably thought they had been saved. So Andrew, do you see this sort of scenario often?
Yes, it's extremely common on the sorts of days where you have the high fire danger. It's generally driven by a northwesterly wind, and quite right, very often late afternoon it does change around to the south, which creates the danger that you've referred to. The fire sort of is coming back on itself, which obviously opens up a whole new dimension, a whole new fire front, and those who previously thought they were out of harm's way suddenly find themselves with the fire bearing down on them because it's changed direction. Very common.
Great, thank you. All right, so that's probably it for the sim table. I'm going to hand back to James now to do the next topic.
Okay, thank you very much, Jenny. So the next thing on here is that we are going to hear from James, but just very briefly, now that everyone's seen the simulation, I'd like to do just one little extra poll. So I'll just end the screen share now and come back to the regular presentation. So the poll I'd like to ask, put up there is basically a question I'd like to ask the audience, and I'm just basically going to ask everyone, if they'd like to kind of commit to doing a bushfire survival plan and sharing it amongst their friends and family. So the idea is that you just essentially put your hand up to say that you'll do a bushfire survival plan. And if you don't, just say no thanks. And those who put their hand up and say yes, they will make a bushfire plan and share it with their friends and family. I will then over the next month send you an email, about 3 emails, 3 reminder emails over the course of a month, just to check in with you and see how you go and see if you need any help making your bushfire survival plan. Because if you do need help or advice, I can always send your questions over to members of the RFS and Fire and Rescue to help get their advice or information that you can then put into your plan. So for those who in the audience who would like to commit to doing bushfire survival plan over the next month, using the ClimateWise Communities website, please just indicate now. I thought I'd launched the poll already, actually. In fact, I hadn't. So the poll should be in front of your screen now. And those who would like to make a bushfire plan, please just tick yes. And it's great to see virtually everyone is putting a hand up and saying, yes, they'll make a bushfire survival plan. That's fantastic. Now, if you already have a bushfire survival plan and it's in your head, well, the next best thing you can do is to actually make a written one. And so if you have a bushfire survival plan that's inside your head, just tick yes, and we'll be enjoying the conversation and the process of making a bushfire survival plan. Okay, cool. So I think quite a few people have responded. So yeah. Okay, I think that's it. So I'll end the poll now. So thank you very much for everyone for those of you who put your hand up and answered the poll. I'll be in contact with you shortly. All right, all the best. Thanks. Cool. All right. So next we'll hear from James from the New South Wales Fire and Rescue, who will talk to you about the CFUs, the community fire units. Over to you, James.
Thank you, James. Thank you, everybody. Thanks for inviting us along. Just looking at that simulation table, it's fascinating watching that goes, and unfortunately seeing too many of those in real action going. But just in that area alone, we have, I think, just over 12 community fire units in that area alone, and just watching the fire crew towards, I see how they would have been impacted upon. So what the community fire units are, if you're looking at that website, the community fire website you had earlier, it very much mirrors a lot of that. And we talk about the bushfire survival plans. The CFU program, it trains you all how to identify the hazards in your area, how to write and activate this bushfire survival plan, but it also equips you on how to prepare and defend your house. Now, when I say defend your house, we don't want you standing in front of that fire front. That's not what the community fire unit is about. It's about preparing the neighbourhood, preparing your street, your property in the event of a bushfire, in the lead up to it. So in the next few months, the community fire unit program, well, these will be busy little beavers running around, getting their yards, their neighbourhoods, even the bush behind it, getting it all prepared, ready for bushfire season as we approach come September, October, and on. So we want it ready to go for then. CFU program has been running since, well, it started in the aftermath of the 1994 bushfire. So we've been around for quite a while. We have over 512 units across the state, and about 50 in the actual Ku-ring-gai LGA. So we have a very good presence there. Now, getting back to what unit involves, you may have seen some trailers around your neighbourhoods, red fire and rescue trailers, or there are some cabinets still around. These cabinets are located on that bushfire zone, behind properties in the asset protection zones around there. And in them, there is some basic firefighter materials. So some pumps, like hose and nozzles, brake hose, and just some stuff to help clear around your property. We will teach you how to do all these things, how you can mitigate and protect your homes. The CFU volunteers, and they are volunteers, we have nearly 5,000 at the moment. They are geared towards, they can take that ember attack. So you mentioned before how embers get through the cracks in the roof and sort of stuff, and to make sure that your gas bottle's turned the right way. We also talk about things on how to prepare your garden, how to plan your garden out such that the fire's not going to have linking foliage from the back to the front to get under the house. Now we teach you how to get the, everybody's seen, you all have the wheelie bins, the plastic ones. Now they go up really well and they burn quite hot. The big plastics made of petrol. So when they burn really well. And it's like having a flamethrower under your eaves. So we teach you people how to move them away, move things away. Mentioned how when you've got that short period of time, if it's too late to evacuate, we want you to shelter in place. Simple things we teach you is like bring the doormat inside, because embers get on that, and again, it's like another flamethrower at the front door. Bring your garden hose, bring it inside. And we teach you that you can actually hook it into your laundry, where the washing machine gets. You can plug it in, you can turn it on there, and you've got hose inside the house. Okay, because if you leave it outside, it will melt and burn away, and it won't be any good for you. A lot of houses will, when the fire comes, the house is actually rated. We talked about the BALs. It won't catch fire at the first start of the fire. Okay, so the fire comes just because the fire's going past, your house won't all of a sudden combust. Well, it shouldn't. Okay, it may catch on fire, and when the fire front goes, you can go out and put it out before it gets too deeply ingrained in the house. Okay, if it's going, we want you to run away or go shelter somewhere else. But when these ember attacks, that's what the CFU comes along in its own. You can put out the ember attacks. When the fire front comes, they go shelter inside. Then when the fire front moves on, they come back and they dampen it out. And that's how we protect a lot of the houses. Okay, so the CFU at the moment protects over 17,000 properties. And it's just neighbourhoods looking out for each other, and they can go across multiple types of events. We talk about heat waves, storms, flood events, and sort of stuff. By building these networks along the street with your neighbours, it's another way you can chat across and introduce strangers, become neighbours, and then all of a sudden they get together on a regular basis for other things as well. Okay, so you might find Mrs. Jenkins at number 5, for example, maybe have ever seen her, and she doesn't, may not have somebody to take her around, or you can identify these people that are vulnerable in the community and you can make plans for them. So someone just needs to go check on Mrs. Jenkins, for example, to see if she's there or she's gone away and things like that. So we can look out for each other. So the CFU program has got a lot more benefits than just preparing for bushfire. Okay. Now, if you've got any questions, throw it in there. But if you want to learn more about the CFU program, jump on the Fire and Rescue's website, look up community fire units. It's free to join. There are no requirements. If you want to start a unit, you only need to have someone who's going to volunteer to help organise it. You need 8 people who live in the area and commit to training. Training's only 4 quick online modules and 1 day training. We come and do it for you. When we'll give you all this gear. Okay, so it's just a service we've been doing for, like I said, nearly 30 years. Okay, and a trailer we'll put in your street somewhere. Okay, that's a very quick overview. There's a whole video and stuff in the link at the Fire and Rescue's website, which I'll see if we can get that thrown up there for you as well. Okay.
Thank you very much, James, for that. I've just popped the web link to the CFU website on Fire and Rescue's website, just in the chat there. I've seen a few people have put their hand up to ask a question. If you do have a question, now is the time you can have it answered. So please write your question into the Q&A box. That should be at the bottom of your screen. So, so if there's any questions, by all means, just pop them in there and I will read them out for the panelists to answer. So while we wait for people to write their answers, are there any things that you would like to, the panelists, Andrew, Adam, James, and Gary, is there anything you would like to mention that wasn't necessarily covered in the presentation? It could be maybe the distances embers could travel, or maybe the hard reality of what it is like to defend a property during a bushfire. And any myth-busting things you've come across in your time work with the fires that you might like to sort of deal with now, so that, because there's a lot of misunderstandings about what it's like to fight fire. Do I put a wet towel over me? Is it dry, or all that kind of stuff? So yeah, I'm just Jenny's just told me to stop talking, let you guys answer. So yeah, go ahead.
I'll take that to start with. Thanks, James. Look, the best thing to wear on a fire impact day is long sleeves, long pants, a form of helmet if you have one, and that should be cotton, whether it be overalls, whether it be jeans, but cotton clothing, and be completely covered up. The news loves putting people in singlets and thongs and shorts on a roof with a garden hose, but seriously, if you're dealing with embers, that's definitely not the place to be, and it's not the appropriate attire. You can get from different places like Bunnings and other websites blocks that go in downpipes, and you can fill your downpipes full of water before early in the day prior to any fire starting. It is always beneficial because that means that any leaf litter, etc., that's in the gutters can't catch fire. But being prepared, having a mask and some goggles, because the smoke is considerable under these circumstances, as you would have seen in the sim, and in reality it is. So your sight gets blocked by smoke, and all of a sudden you can't see and you don't know where you are or where you're going. So goggles are always beneficial, and a form of mask to wear. Now, many years ago when I started in the volunteers in the fire service, we used to wear nappies, and we'd wear a nappy and tie it around our face so that we could breathe through the nappy. And look, some people still do that, but nowadays there are considerable masks available to you that be those P2 or P3 masks are very beneficial. And the more kit you have, unfortunately this summer has been very wet, but we will have, unfortunately with the Australian environment, we will have nasty summers again, where we do have significant fires, and having the appropriate equipment prior to the day is always beneficial.
Great, thank you very much for that, Adam. We've got a first question here from Tracy Ann Palmer. Her question is there a particular type of gutter guard that I should install? So who would like to take that one? So Gary? Or...
I'm quite happy to, if that's all right, James.
Sure, go for it.
It's a really simple answer, but it's a very, very common question, and I'm glad it's been asked. The best gutter guard that you can put onto your house is going to be a metal gutter guard with a fine mesh. Putting in a plastic gutter guard, which are readily available and quite cheap, quite often they don't stay in the gutter very well. They will catch more leaves in them than they'll prevent getting into your gutter, and they may also be flammable themselves. So a metal gutter guard that's going to prevent anything getting into your gutter is the best you can do. And if you're able to install it effectively so that it's going to prevent anything getting through at all, that's terrific.
And I believe that there's, even within metal gutter guards, there's variations. For example, there's ones that go under the tile and things that go over the first row of tiles or the color bonds. So I believe the ones that go over the first row of tiles or over the color bond on top might be a little bit better because it helps the sheeting of the leaves off, instead of, whereas some I think can still accumulate. So
yeah, so the design, you're right, is important. If it's going to allow the leaves to simply, as you said, just flow straight off and over the gutter guard, that's ideal, rather than anything that's going to catch them.
Perfect, perfect. Miss Wang, there's you have your hand up, so if you'd like to ask a question, please type that into the Q&A box, and we should be able to get onto that there now. So now while we're talking, we have a question here from for another one here. So older homes may have a structure and materials that could be changed or upgraded to be more fire safe, or indeed comply with new fire regs. Who is the best to engage with this? So best in summary, that's who can someone go to ask for advice on an older house on how to improve it for bushfire? So Mark, could you take that?
Yeah, I would actually. There are a number of resources actually available even on the web. that can lead you into it, upgrading from each bell to each bell. And actually both RFS and CFA Victoria. CFA's got a wonderful, it's about 20 to 30 pages, the resource for upgrading. Like if you leave your email address, I can get back to you with some of those resources. But generally when people want to have an extension or whatever, they'll actually get a bushfire consultant to look at that aspect. So, yeah, and I'm sure James himself there sitting there knows a fair bit about this issue too. So yes, there are a lot of resources out there. They all have to be certified by Australian standards too, fire resistancy for either timbers or metals or gutter guards or whatever. So there's a lot of work on Australian standards in these materials to be used in upgrading, but certainly there's specialist organisations that deal with that as well. So I can send you some actual links and resources. Someone else, maybe Gary or James or Adam or Andrew might want to answer this too. Thanks.
Well, actually, I might jump in actually. While we're waiting for more questions to drop in, and we're talking about bushfire retrofits, the audience would be happy to know that council actually offers up to 25% of the rebate worth 25% of the costs of retrofitting a house to bushfire. Now, obviously, that's capped at a certain amount. So the amount that's available, the maximum amount available to residents who retrofit their house is about $1,500. So essentially what that means is that if you were to do gutter guard, we will give you 25% of the costs of the retrofit up to a maximum of $1,000. However, but if you were to do, say, a new front door or new bushfire windows, and you lived on bushfire prone land, that would most likely trigger a DA or a CDC. So that's an additional fee on top of doing something which is already expensive. So council offers 50% of the DA fee or CDC fee to a maximum of $500. So in that circumstance, you could be getting up to $1,500 maximum for your new bushfire rated doors or windows. So, so that's what council is doing to try and help residents make their homes a bit more resilient to bushfire. And those are the only two examples of the kind of things you can do. There's a whole range of things you can do to your house that council could give you a rebate for, from metal tanks for bushfire fighting, or sprinklers, all those kinds of things. There's no time here for me to go through it, but to find out more information on the rebate, you can go to the Ku-ring-gai Council website and search for bushfire-wise rebates. The process is fairly straightforward. You fill a form out, I get it, it comes to me, and then I simply contact you and have a chat and about what you want to do, and we'll go from there. And actually, there's one thing we've got to cover off, Jenny, the what if wheel.
Oh, so we did.
Yes. Okay. So thanks for everyone who's still with us. We'll just go back to the Climate-Wise Communities website and cover off on a very key thing, very important function of the website that will actually make sure that you have the best bushfire survival plan known to man. Sorry, that's a bit of hyperbole there, but it'll make you a pretty good one. Here's the what if wheel. So Jenny, do you want to take this on away?
Yeah, basically what this is, it came out of one of the tools that RMIT produced after the Black Summer fires, getting people to think about what their bushfire plan might have to deal with. So we've presented it here as a chocolate wheel. They did it as a pack of cards because they were doing live workshops. And basically you just press the button and it spins around and it'll come up with a random thing that has often happened to people in a bushfire. So it goes, your pet is missing. So more than a few people have refused to leave because they can't find their pet. And when it is a crisis, pets do have a tendency to want to hide. So if you're evacuating and your pet's hiding under the house or somewhere else, that can be extremely frustrating. So often we advise people to put their pets in their carriers that you're going to transport them in well ahead of the evacuation time, so that the animal's there when you need it to be. So I'll flick another one. And again, this has happened many a time for people when there's been a fire. In this case, trees block your escape. So that it might be the escape out of your driveway or the one and only road out. So you have to think, what would you do if a tree blocked your exit? Okay, now it might be that you can get back to your house, or it might be that you can't. So you need to have a plan for that eventuality. So this is why it's called the what if wheel. How would you deal with this if it happened? So try and have that formulated and written down well before any fire season starts. And if you need advice, your local RFS is only too happy to help, or Council's bushfire officer, or I'm sure Fire and Rescue would be happy to answer questions as well. So that's the last tool that we have to show you on the ClimateWise site.
If you want additional information, we have FAQs where there are some where you can ask, where commonly asked questions are posted there. There's also a video gallery of past workshops and of various YouTube videos by researchers such as Justin Leonard from the CSIRO and others, and past bushfire simulations of other areas around Ku-ring-gai. If you have any questions that come up to you later on and you forgot to ask them, you can go to the Ask an Expert. So in this section here, you just put your name and your postcode, email, and your question into this box here, and you submit it to us, and I will get it, and then I'll push these questions off to members such as the RFS, Fire and Rescue, CSIRO, Bushfire Architects, and any other experts that we can find for you. We have quite a few already on our books, so believe me, if there's anything you'd like to ask or have answered, put your question in, and we will answer them. Okay, so before I go, I think that brings us to the end of the workshop. There's not much else we can talk about here other than we do have a storm workshop. And now is a very good time to talk about storms, actually, because with the torrential rain that's coming our way, it might be worthwhile to book into our rain, hail, and blackout workshop, both again featuring the sim table. That will be that's booked for the 23rd of March, 7 p.m. So feel free to go onto the ClimateWise Community's website, workshops, and you should be able to book into the workshop there. Otherwise, you can go to the Ku-ring-gai Council website, What's On page, search for rain, hail, or blackouts, and you'll be able to book into that workshop as well, and we'll help you find out how to prepare for storms. We'll be working with the SES on that workshop as well. So that should be a good one. So by all means, please come along to that. It'd be great to see you there as well. So that's it for us. So I'd like to say a big thank you to Andrew Wilson from the Kalara RFS Brigade, Adam Perry and James Manuel. I think I probably mangled that. I'm sorry, James, from New South Wales Fire and Rescue, Mark Schuster from Council, and again also Gary Hansen from New South Wales Fire and Rescue. Okay, thank you very much for coming along, and have a lovely evening. All the best. Thanks.
Thanks.
Thank you.